Hello, welcome to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. I'm Dino Varelli, founder and CEO of Project Purple and the host of the Project Purple podcast. We have another interview for you coming up with a very special guest after a few updates here. I would say quick, but these aren't going to be quick here. I'm editing on the fly here as we go. We're already halfway through, more than halfway through. We're actually, as we record this, we're heading into August, which is just insane how fast this year has gone. But here's the great news for the audience listening and watching. We are on pace for another record year, which is just unbelievable. Last year was our best year ever. And already here we are, as I said, through 7 months, and we are on pace to have another amazing year, which just means we get to help that many more people from our programs with patient aid, our food program, and research. And I just want to thank everyone who has supported, donated, or participated in a Project Purple event till this point. Crazy, many of our fall marathon teams are full. We're sold out. So if you're looking to run with us in any of our major marathons, our world majors, you got to get on a 2024 team. Berlin is actually closed. We did have some spots, but that is now closed as we record this. We do still have spots, though, in Twin Cities, in Minneapolis in the fall. Our Detroit full half and 5K, which is a great race that we're bringing back. We also have a team in the Chicago half fall happening in September, and our newly added Sono, South Norwalk half marathon and 5K in Connecticut. So we've got a new team there that we still have spots available. Also, if you're running your own individual race and one that's not listed, you can always support Project Purple via our Pioneer program. We also have our virtual event series happening. Our Work Harder, It's Not Chemo is in August, as well as our Horner Hustle 5K for those that live in the Park Ridge, Illinois, just right outside of Chicago, right near the airport. That's happening in August. As well as, which this is kind of exciting, we're going to have our first ever Rappel event, which is our Over the Edge event in Hartford, Connecticut, coming up on September 16th as we go over the edge for Project Purple and to raise awareness for pancreatic cancer. To learn more about all these great events, visit our website at projectpurple.org and make sure to follow us on social media to stay up to date on all things Project Purple. And we are everywhere on social media. We're even on TikTok now, which is fascinating. And I think we also just joined the new Threads, so we're there as well. Without further ado, let's meet our special guest coming to us all the way from, I say, the left coast, but the west coast, but lives in Wyoming, but currently is in Portland, Oregon, pancreatic cancer survivor, Mary Billiter. Mary, welcome to the Project Purple podcast.
Hello. It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm in Oregon. We had some car stuff going on the way home. So I'm here in beautiful, and I love Oregon. But we were supposed to be home, so you get me on the phone today.
Well, it's awesome. It's awesome to have you here. I know our team's done a great job of lining up some great guests here on the podcast, and I'm excited to hear your story. I know we were just connecting before we hit record here, just getting to know each other a little bit. I know a little bit about your story at a very high level, but I'm excited to hear it because it's a cool one. And I always love, I think one thing that this podcast has really evolved, and I we were talking a little bit about this, over 6.5 years now, is just really being able to tell these survivor stories, and that's something that I think it's so special for so many reasons. But I think what's so cool for me is because I've always said, like, I get to meet the survivors at events or when I travel, as I was saying, been to a lot of parts in the country before we're recording here. But to be able to now bring that to the audience and to be able to amplify that is just really, really special. And when we get people from all over the world, as I mentioned, we had a guy from the UK, we've interviewed people from so many places, and it's just really special. So I'm really excited to have you here and to get started. This is your turn I'm going to hand the mic over to you, as I said before, and your opportunity to kind of share your journey with pancreatic cancer. And as I said, you can stay as high level as you want, or you can get in the weeds, and I'll be taking notes and jumping in from time to time. But with that, Mary, the microphone is yours.
Thanks, Dino. And I think what I love about this podcast is it also brings hope, because anytime you hear about pancreatic cancer, you hear about everybody who lost their battle, and I think for me, it was really important to focus on the survivors and those who made it through, and not knowing I would be one of them. So my story's, I don't think it's very unique, but at the same time, I think one of the reasons that pancreatic cancer is so hard to diagnose is because by the time you feel symptoms, it's usually the tumor or the pancreatic cancer has spread. And that's when you start to have the symptoms. I ate, kind of embarrassed. I ate something really greasy, and it was, it's so embarrassing. It was in November of 2021, and I had like the greasiest hamburger you could have. And I say that because I'm pretty good about what I eat, and I was just craving it. And, I had it without a bun, but I had it on a Friday night, and I started to feel this sharp pain in my left shoulder blade, and my mom grew up with a nurse. So my mom was a nurse and my dad was an investigative journalist. So I had one parent that said, you basically had to be unconscious or not breathing to go to the ER. And my dad, being an investigative journalist and a Pulitzer Prize-winning one at that, was always, making us wary of hidden hospital costs. So, I was raised with both of those. So it was kind of like, you really have to be on death's door to go to the emergency room. So I kept saying, oh, this will pass. And I was dating my former husband. That's a whole nother podcast, but basically COVID was not kind to us. And I called him and I said, by Sunday, the pain would not go away. And I mean, I was just in a mess. And I told my son was 14. My youngest was 14 at the time. And one of my twins was 24. And they were both home. And I said, guys, I think I'm having a heart attack. They were playing video games and they didn't stop. They're like, oh, you're fine. And I was like, oh, okay. But then I called Ron and I said, I think I'm having a heart attack, because being raised by a nurse, I also know that heart attacks can show up. You can get pains in your chest that can radiate to the back. And so I was like, oh my gosh, my dad died really young of a heart attack. Maybe that's what's happening. And Ron was so calm. He's like, well, we won't know until we go to the ER. So it was a Sunday night, long football day. ER was packed. I quietly went up to the intake nurse and said, I think I'm having a heart attack. And those magical doors behind her just quickly opened. They ushered me in, put all the EKG stuff on me, watched her spit out the tape. I looked for her reaction and she was really good about staying neutral. So I was like, But then when they took the electrodes off and asked me to follow her, I turned to Ron. I said, either they're asking me to walk off my heart attack or I'm not having one. But the pain was so intense. And they couldn't give me anything until they knew what they were treating. So they did a CT scan and they thought originally it was pancreatitis. And I'd never had that. And I had only heard about it. When you say go into the weeds, I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been sober since I was 18. I'm 55 now. I just celebrated 37 years of sobriety. The only time I'd ever heard of pancreatitis was from alcoholics who came in because of pancreatitis, because usually I've been told it can be brought on by excessive drinking. So the first thing I told him was like, look, I'm sober. You can take hair. I had at the time a lot of hair. And I said, I haven't touched a drug or alcohol in 35 years. And they gave me morphine and that barely touched the pain. And after that long of sobriety, usually drugs will kind of hit you hard. It barely touched the pain. So they kept me in the hospital for 3 days and released me to go. Now in Wyoming, we have great health care. However, we are a really rural state. So we don't have a lot of the same amenities that bigger cities have. So I went into Aurora, Colorado to Anschutz, and they were going to put in a stent. They said, oh, we're just going to open up your pancreatic duct, put in a stent, come back in 3 weeks. And I was at the time, looking back, I was complaining like, I can't believe I have to have this done. And then in 3 weeks, I have to have it taken out. Da, 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 da. Well, I went under, and when I woke up, the doctor was there, I guess a surgeon, and he said, I said, did it go well? He said, we weren't able to put it in. And I said, why? And he said, we found a mass. And I said, do you think it's cancer? And he nodded. And I remember Ron and me both just crying. Like, I had battled breast cancer in 2015 and had been victorious. And I just thought, pancreatic cancer, like, no. And then it just seems like a whirlwind. Everything happened so quickly. I got a port put in. I'd never had that with the breast cancer. I didn't have to have that, thank God. Had the port put in, and I started my first round of 5-FU chemo December 20th, so 5 days before Christmas. And I was supposed to be in Chicago with my oldest twin son and his fiance and spend the holiday with them. And they ended up coming to me. And, in Wyoming, it's so beautiful at Christmas time. We get about 6 months of winter, but at Christmas time, it's as if Mother Nature herself knows it's just such a special day. And it literally, the snow looks like crystals. It's just gorgeous. And I'm laying on a couch, and anybody who hasn't gone through, and I hope it's not a lot, but I know that's not a reality. Anybody who hasn't gone through 5-FU, it's fluorox. I can never pronounce it, fluoroxetol or something to that effect. And basically, it's the strand. But I was told by a chemo nurse, it stands for 5 different chemos they're putting in you. I don't know. I've looked it up. It's really hard to decide. I just know that you go in on a Monday and you go home with a pack, and you don't get it taken off till Wednesday. And that is intense. And, Christmas. So I went in on the 20th, and the 22nd I had the port removed, and Christmas that year just looked so differently than what we had imagined. And my kids were there. I have 4 children, and my twins were there, Aston and Kyle, my daughter, Sierra, who was in college at the time, and then my youngest son, Cooper. And they were all around me. And, as a mom, I've always made Christmas dinner, and Christmas Eve, we go to Mass, and we did go to Mass, but I could barely make it. And, so that started the chemo journey, and I had 2 treatments in December and 3 in January. So I had 5 treatments of 5-FU. They gave me the whole month of February off, and then I went and had my Whipple. So
Wow.
I had to keep remembering that I was one of the lucky ones. My tumor was 20 millimeters. And then after 5 rounds of chemo, it went down to 8, which was insane. And so I remember when I was talking to Dr. Arndt, who was my surgical oncologist at Anschutz, when he first told me, I said, is there anything good? Because, all they tell you are all the side effects and everything that could happen. And he's like, we never see a tumor this small. And then when it went from 20 to 8, I was like, okay, that's even better. So I am a single parent. And even though I was dating my former husband, my family's in California. Yet I never felt alone. I had Ron beside me the whole time. The community of Wyoming was great. But that Whipple surgery is intense. It is intense. And he was there with my daughter, who flew out, and she stayed with me for 10 days in the hospital, and Ron stayed at home with Cooper. So they removed the tumor, and here's another miracle. It had not spread to the lymph nodes or the margins. And that's unheard of. When they got it all. And I had to learn to walk again. My daughter is a documentarian, and her degree at Bozeman, MSU, is in film. And so she did this amazing documentary on the cancer journey. And it was so well done because it didn't go into the macabre. It didn't go into, this pity thing. It really it was almost like perks of being a wallflower, but with cancer. She just did such a beautiful job. And, you know, she sees me walking in there, and I didn't know she had video on a lot of times. And there was a moment where I had to have a feed bag put on because I wasn't keeping anything down. And they put it, you know, it's horrible. And I said, I just wish I could die. And then she said, but what about me? And it was so selfish of me. The pain was so great that I kept praying to God that I would die. And I'm really grateful he didn't hear my cry. You know, I'm really grateful. I'm Catholic. If you meet any Mary, they're going to be Catholic. Or, you know, usually an Italian family, or I'm Irish Catholic. So, you know, if I have any regrets, it's that my daughter saw me at my worst, and there's nothing worse than, I can't imagine hearing a parent say, I wish I was just dead. You know, that's not my best moment. And yet she captured it so well. And in her documentary, she said, how selfish of me that I wanted her around when she was in so much pain. So, wow. So I got out in 10 days. I cheated at the hospital, and, you know, they'd say, how much did you eat? And I'd put some down the toilet because I just wanted to get out. And because I knew I would heal better at home. And I did. And Cooper was at school. He was a freshman. I tried to keep his routine in high school as sane as possible. And Cece went back to college. Sierra, we call her Cece. She went back to college, and my twins went on with their life. And it felt like mine was on pause. Like I just watched winter go by. I watched spring go by. A month after the Whipple, I had more 5FU. And then I got colitis. And so then I had a really good local oncologist who switched me from 5FU to Gembraxine and and another one begins with an A. I can't, it's something. And that's when I lost
Gemzar and Abraxine.
Thank you. Yes. And my former husband, Ron, is bald, and I love bald. I think if you're going to be bald, you got to rock it. And I think one of the most romantic things he did, because I had this kind of like comb over going.
Yeah.
And it wasn't working. And I talked to him about it, and he said, you know, when I had that, I just took it off. And I said, would you do that? And so he shaved my head. And I got to tell you, we'd been together so many years, decades. And when he shaved my head, it was the most romantic thing, you know, just because he was just so loving and just, you know, he's like, dang, you look good bald. You know? Like, you know, everybody told me I had a good head, but, you know, like I have a 5 forehead. So, you know, I was bald, and then we switched the chemo, and then my very last, we didn't know it was going to be my last treatment, but it was in July, on July 11th. And that night Ron he was at a work function, and I called him and I said, I'm having a really hard time breathing. So he took me in, and what can happen with the chemo is it's called pneumonitis, where it attacks your lungs. And I got pneumonitis and pneumonia on July 11th. And I remember this because when I finally got admitted, it didn't take them long, but they put me into a room, and it was turning midnight. And I said, July 12th, I said, I should, you know, be getting my 36-year sobriety chip. And so this male nurse, so nice, he got the lid of a medicine bottle, and he wrote 36 on it and gave me my chip. So, you know, but I went back to my local oncologist and said, sorry, let me see if I can. They're clearly doing some yard work outside.
That's all right.
Oh my goodness. I'm in a hotel, so this is fun. I wish it was my
okay.
So anyway, I went to my local oncologist and said, I don't think I can do anymore. And I had two sessions left. And Dr. El Terabelli is Egyptian, and he does not mince words. And the entire time I worked with him locally, he would always be very statistical and very clinical. And he said, you did a good job. And I knew that was high praise from Dr. El Terabelli. I was like, okay, I'm taking it. So he came and I rang the bell on July 29th. So just a year ago, I rang the bell, and I got to dance with my son at his September wedding. I was pretty bald. My hair came in this color, white and gray. People love it. And I'm like, but you didn't see me before. And my youngest son said, Mom, that's like telling people to F off when they're saying that. So I've had to say, thank you. Because I want to say, like, this isn't what I look like normally, but it's this whole transformation, and again, I was one of the lucky ones. Like I just passed the year mark, right? Today's the 31st, and I can literally, this whole year I've been like, where was I at this time last year? And just, it's amazing when you look back and what the human spirit can endure. I mean, it's incredible. And I didn't do it alone. And I definitely believe in God. And I know he was beside me. And so I try to, anytime I hear somebody going through something, I don't care if it's a hangnail, if it's hurting them, it's important, but no buts. Pancreatic cancer, though, it's like the top 3 cancers. And anytime you tell somebody that's what you're battling, you get an audible gasp because they're like, so I got diagnosed at 53. I turned 54, and this year I turned 55. So it was a year, little over a year battle. So yeah, it was tough.
That's amazing. I mean, so yeah, now that we go through the numbers here, like being diagnosed at 53 is young. I mean, you're young at 55. I mean, but like that's a young age. I mean, I think sometimes, and this is the great thing about the podcast, right? Like we share this journey, and thank you for doing so in such an amazing way. And I've got so many questions here, but my point here is I think, people often hear, and I just saw this the other day. They're like, well, pancreatic cancer is an old person disease. No, it's not. Like when people say old, they're talking about like people in their 80s, like, someone
Right.
who's 82 years old getting it, which, to me, I've met a lot of 82-year-olds that are very active, that are more active than a lot of 60-year-olds. So let me just put that out there first. Like age is just a number. But I think in some parts of the scientific medical community, people still have this perception about pancreatic cancer being, hey, you've lived 80 plus years, now you've got this thing, and that's who gets it. That is not true. And so we're defying those odds every day, in every episode that we have, because we don't interview many 80-year-olds, let's put it that way.
Right.
So really fascinating piece that comes up here, and this is like my first big question. You had breast cancer here in 2015. You mentioned you didn't do chemo, so I'm guessing it was like, not to get into too much of your personal business here, but like a lumpectomy maybe, or...
No, all the stuff. No, it was lobular carcinoma in situ, so it was supposed to stay in situ. Yeah. Is in place. I did have a lumpectomy, and then I had to have 2 core needle biopsies, and then I took tamoxifen,
yep,
an oral chemo. I remained at high risk for it to become invasive, but touch wood, it never did. And so I was getting scans every 6 months. And now that seems so minor. I got nauseous with the tamoxifen. I had to have an abdominal hysterectomy because I was one of the few that had a reaction to tamoxifen, and it caused endometriosis. So, it was just like, I was in and out of that hospital, and I didn't know I had it. I was on assignment for the local paper in the statewide paper in Wyoming, doing a story on breast cancer, like we do every October. And I was like, oh gosh, how did I get this assignment? And I wanted to get a survivor that had a really good story. And I found an OBGYN. So here's a doctor that's specializing in obstetrics and gynecology. Her mother died of breast cancer when she was 6, which led her to be an OBGYN. And then she found her own lump and waited 6 months before she got it checked. So I was like, I have the trifecta of survivors. This is awesome. And during the interview, she said, have you had a mammogram? And I didn't lie. I said yes, but I didn't tell her it had been 5 years ago. So I went and got a mammogram, and I'll never forget, Kelsey was the tech, and she said it was a Friday. Don't ever get anything done on a Friday. I can tell you anything. And she said, do we have your cell number? And I knew then I had failed. And so the next week they literally said, yeah, it's they did a lumpectomy on my right breast, and then I had tamoxifen, and they had to do 2 core needle biopsies and abdominal hysterectomy. So it was a really packed year. And in the meantime, I wrote about it in my weekly column for the statewide paper so people could kind of follow. And it was all about early detection. So it was kind of like pixie dust is what it looked like on the screen. And they went kind of lassoed it. So again, it was important at the time. I took care of it at the time. Pancreatic cancer and the red death that everybody can get with that. I've had pharmacists tell me in the hospital that 5-FU is the worst chemo that is out there. It's worse than anything. And I'm not trying to minimize anybody else's journey at all. It's just to put it in perspective that how tough 5-FU is. It's just brutal. And pancreatic cancer, I was told, is the only cancer, no matter the stage, they give you chemo before and after. Whereas sometimes with breast cancer, you just get it after, before. So.
Yeah. And for those that, I know we've talked about chemos before here, but 5-FU, as you said, it's kind of, I use the term, like I dial it down. It's like the kitchen sink. So, and just think about that. Like it's all encompassing. And when you go home with the pump, like to your point, like you go in, you get the chemo in that one day, which can take sometimes as long as 8 to 10 hours, for some people. And then you go home with this pump and, okay, so people go, well, what's the big deal about that? But that pump is like buzzing the whole 2 days that you're on it.
Yeah. It sounds like a slot machine, but without the payout. You're like, ching. Cha-ching, and I'd put a pillow over it. You can't shower with it. Like, yeah,
it's not enjoyable whatsoever.
You're tethered to it. Absolutely.
And so the medical term is, and I'm going to butcher this, and this is probably why they call it 5-FU, but it's fluorouracil chemo. Fluorouracil, FLUOROURACIL. More commonly called as 5-FU. So yeah.
The FU part is aptly named.
Exactly. So you get the breast cancer diagnosis. And so now you just mentioned something that's really kind of fascinating. You have the hysterectomy, which I want to talk about in a second. When you got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, did anyone do genetic testing?
They did. So I had all that genetic testing done with the breast cancer, but this is the fascinating thing. From 2015 to fast forward to 2022, when they did the genetic testing, they were able to test like 48 new markers. Correct. So when they did the breast cancer screening, I did not have the BRCA gene, the BRCA gene. I was negative for that. And the only thing that showed up was possibly colon cancer. So I'm one of 4, and my older brother said, great, you're going to save your tits, but lose your ass. So, so that was the joke. I hope that's okay to say.
It's all good. It's all good. We love humor.
I had milk duds, brothers are awesome that way. So I got all the jokes. And so I didn't have, colon cancer never came up. I had the colonoscopy. It was all clear. So, and pancreatic, when they did the genetic, I had no genetic disposition for any of this. So that's good for my children. It's good for my siblings, for my nieces and nephews, that it was all clear. I just, I guess I pulled the short straw. So.
So fascinating. I mean, the genetics piece is a place, I'm sure in your research, which we'll talk about, is where a lot of the science is going, right? With immunotherapy, genetics. And so it's just fascinating when you, as a layman here, I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn last night, and I don't pretend to be a doctor, but I feel like I do know enough because I deal with this every day. But you hear someone who has breast cancer, who has a hysterectomy, you start to go down that route of genetics, right? And then you have a very positive outcome here with pancreatic cancer. I think, and this is not for your case, but as a whole, Mary, that we are just scratching the surface of genetics, right? And so it's fascinating. I think eventually maybe we'll come to, and maybe this is like sci-fi where, everyone, you'll just go in, they'll just take a blood sample and it'll be, a 300 panel instead of a 115, and they'll know everything. I was just having a conversation with someone who they had a child who had a missing chromosome, but then they had to do IVF and they were able to take that chromosome out or put the chromosome in that they were missing. Like, it was so fascinating, like genetics and what they're able to do, because this person, the first child was born, I think it was with an extra chromosome, and it caused a lot of defects, not from a physical standpoint, but from a mental standpoint. And so they wanted to have more children. So they were able to go in and take that chromosome out. And now they have a healthy second child, which is just so fascinating to me, right? So they can do that. We can do that from a science standpoint. And I think eventually what may happen is we'll get to that in the cancer space, because we do know that there's a certain genes or certain families that have a high propensity of cancers. Some of them are identified, like the BRCA gene, right, which is probably the most popular, and others we just don't know. And there's also this thought, now there's been a lot of work with vaccines, because of what we've just gone through over the last 3 years. And so potentially there might be something like a cold shot, like a flu shot, I should say, where, for people that are at a high risk for certain cancers, may just get a shot a year and it'll keep the cancer at bay potentially, So it's interesting and it's fascinating where that science is going. But, again, back to your story, looking at your profile, I would say, like, someone listening who's probably, in the space would go, oh, what about genetics? When is Dino going to ask the question about genetics? So we got to bring that up.
It's a great question to ask, and it is so important. And I shared, you have to do the family history for people who have not had genetic testing. They ask a very thorough family history. So both my parents are deceased, but thankfully I had aunts on either side that could fill in a lot of questions, like, did anybody have breast cancer? Did anybody have pancreatic cancer? My grandfather had a brain tumor. It was just finding out these things I didn't know. And one of my aunts had breast cancer back when they just did a radical mastectomy. So, so much has changed. And knowing that family piece is super important too, because, but it's great for my children. But I still am like, that doesn't mean that it's a clear all. It's,
Correct.
Keep your health, keep yourself in good health.
Yeah. Which for being sober for 37 years. So question for you here that came up and just mentioned. So you had this hysterectomy, which is like, you played it off. And the reason I know is, like, my mom went down this road when she was diagnosed, and that is a bitch of a surgery.
It is. Oh God. And I had 3 C-sections. So I was like, hey, I really would rather just you cut me open again, because I just know that but the crazy thing about that thought was like, oh, I've had C-sections. This will be great. Well, after you have a C-section, you have this beautiful baby, or in my case, twins the first time. And the baby helps everything go back into working order, right? The nursing and everything.
Yeah.
When you have an abdominal hysterectomy, every time I walked, it felt like my stomach was going to fall through. I didn't have that. And the worst thing, I didn't have that same feeling. And then the worst thing is, God bless the local hospital, but they placed me on the maternity ward after the surgery. So I'm hearing all these women give birth and the sounds of new life when I felt like mine was slipping away. And I was married to Ron at the time, and I'd had Cooper when I was 39, and we were thinking about, hey, he's young enough, let's have another. And, so that dream was gone. And to be where everybody else is so vibrant and full of life, it was tough. And it was a hard recovery. It was nothing like the Whipple, but it was it was very emotional. It was a very emotional recovery because I love kids and I love being a mom. And it doesn't mean I'm not still a mom. I just couldn't be a mom again. So that was kind of a bummer. And I had half of a breast. I look like a Picasso painting, for God's sake. Now I have the Whipple. I'm like, just the way that you have to turn your head is, I look good. But I mean, oh my gosh, I've got more scars on me than it's horrible. But Ron doesn't see them, and that's pretty cool.
Well, it's special.
Well, yeah.
And I love how you also, so talking about the Whipple, and we've had people talk about this, but I just want to talk about that for a second, because you said that was, and so this is part of my question here was, because I know the hysterectomy is no joke. That's a mother of a surgery, and it's a long recovery, mentally and physically. Now you go into this Whipple, and that's a bitch of a surgery. So your experience, if we can, let's talk a little bit about that, because you said some pretty powerful stuff, and I'm not going to pick on you here, Mary, but if we look at the past you've given us, I mean, you were an alcoholic at 18, which is a pretty young age. So we don't need to go down that road, but that's a pretty powerful statement at such a young age to realize you probably was pretty bad to realize, hey, you needed help. Right. And you've been through some stuff here. The pancreatitis is, that kind of pain is insane. We've had people on here, that is some of the worst gut wrenching pain. The hysterectomy, again, we just talked about that. So this Whipple was worse than anything that you've ever had, physically or mentally. And you've been on the roller coaster a couple times here.
Yes. And the hysterectomy, the difference is with the hysterectomy, I could still eat. Right. So, it was tough to walk. I would always hold my stomach like I thought something was going to fall out. It was a long, slow, arduous process, but you could eat, and you could kind of comfort that because you could sleep on your side. There was a lot of different things. And pancreatitis, again, morphine didn't even touch the pain. And yes, I have a high tolerance for drugs and alcohol. Yes, I got sober young because I hit my bottom fast. It didn't take long, and I had a lot of, real close chances at, bad stuff happening. But when the morphine didn't even touch the pain, and I was like, this isn't, I wasn't getting any relief. And I remember Ron saying, just give it a few minutes. And I'm like, it's not kicking in. So when they did the Whipple, they put an IV in my back. And I remember they take you to recovery, for a couple hours, actually. And the surgery itself was almost 9 hours. Mm-hmm. I obviously don't remember any of it. But when I came out, I'm all stapled and I'm all, patched up. And I'm in recovery. I'm feeling fine. And I'm hearing all these poor people that aren't doing fine. And then I finally get to my room, and I have not even an hour with Ron and Cece before visiting hours end. And they said, Dr. Arndt saw us. It looks good, clear margins. I was like, yay. Well, when they left, all of a sudden my back started itching. Like I was really feeling the pain. I was like, oh my gosh. And when the nurse would come in, I'd be like, do you have a back scratcher? I was literally asking for a back scratcher. I think they thought I was high. And finally, one of the nurses, the night nurse, was so smart and said, would you lean forward for me? Which, when you have a Whipple, you're cut from stem to sternum, right? So I'm like, oh, so she helps me lean forward. My whole back is hyped because I literally had an allergic reaction to the hydrocodone, the oxy, everything that they were putting in my back. I was having an allergic reaction to, so it wasn't blocking the pain. And so they thought at first it was just the back IV. So they tried to put it back in, which is painful as hell. And finally they realized, oh, she's having an allergic reaction. So to the point about being a recovering alcoholic, what a lot of people don't realize is the American Medical Association, and this is not a podcast for alcoholism, but it's to this point, it's defined as an allergy of the body and an obsession of the mind. My body physically reacts differently to drugs and alcohol than someone else. So I couldn't have, I hate to say the good drugs, but I couldn't have the good drugs because I was breaking out in hives. So they had to get really, really creative. And I really didn't have a block. So it was supposed to block. I didn't have a block. So that's why I was praying to die, because I had about 7 days of the most excruciating, numbing pain of I wish it was numbing. It wasn't. It was the most excruciating pain that was constant, and it wouldn't let up. And I thought, get rid of Guantanamo Bay. Just give somebody either 5FU or a Whipple, and you'll get whatever answers you want, because it is so horrible, So that's why I say it was worse, because with the other things, one, you could eat. Two, the pain was bad, but it wasn't as, this was, they couldn't give me anything other than, I think, like really extra strength, like ibuprofen for the swelling. I mean, I literally was on nothing because I was allergic to everything. So it's in my chart now. And it makes recovering from a surgery super hard, because if you can't sleep, your body can't heal. And I was having a really hard time sleeping because I was in such pain. I think I would literally just black out from the pain. I think the only time I slept was when I was like, I'm done, like it was that bad. So that is why it's important that I'm open with my medical care team, that I'm a recovering alcoholic, because I am bodily different from other patients. I do have a physical reaction to drugs and alcohol. So that, and then when I had pneumonitis, I did take cough syrup, and they said this has like something in it. And at that point I was like, I'm not asking for the bottle. I'm just asking to be able to breathe. And so my motives were clean. I'm like, I don't care what you give me at this point, put, vodka in the dang, inhaler, as long as I can breathe. But I was able to maintain my sobriety because I told my care team who I am and what my makeup is, and they were able to treat me accordingly. But Whipple, hands down, the worst. And pneumonitis would be a close second. Because when you can't breathe, it's a game changer. It just changes the whole everything.
It's so powerful. I mean, I think, again, we on this podcast have talked about complications, but we've never gone in depth into it. And I just appreciate you. I know it's not an easy time. On this note, what do you think was the turning point in that? I know you mentioned the conversation with your daughter, but was that the turning point for this?
You know what? That's awesome. I didn't even remember saying it to her until I saw it later on her documentary, and I was kind of horrified. I think the turning point was when they had to put the PICC line in. I called it the feed bag, but it's a PICC line. You
did mention feedback.
I felt like, it's like, my name is Mary. My dad used to call me Mare, so I felt like a horse, I was like, go ahead. So they put in the PICC line under my arm, and that was awful. And I think that day when I shut all the curtains, I'd always had the windows open. I was up on a high I could see out of Colorado, gorgeous Rocky Mountains. When I shut the curtains, and I turned off all the lights, and I was like, that's it. I just remember I don't know how I got on my knees, but I got on my knees and I just said, I'm done. And then I remember just something inside me, and I know it was my higher power saying, open the damn windows. And I opened the things, and it's like my attitude turned. I was like, nope, I'm not going to, this isn't going to, I have overcome so many things in my short life that this is not going to get me. And Cece took me to the chapel. And in her documentary, she said, at that time, I didn't believe in God, but my mom did. And my kids have seen me go through too. And I had all my kids in sobriety, so they've never seen me drunk, but that doesn't mean they haven't seen me lose hope. And when I knelt, and then Cece goes, let's go to the chapel. And I was on a walker and barely able to move. Something got me up that, I joke and said I was like Mrs. Sawiggins in the Carol Burnett show, if you've ever seen that. I was like hobbling along like Mrs. Sawiggins, and went down to that chapel. And God, the sunlight was coming in on the stained glass, and it was so beautiful. And I thought, there is so much more to life than this, and God has already caught it early. I didn't spread to the lymph nodes or the margins. Like, what part of this can't you get that he's saving you? What part of this makes you so convinced that you aren't deserving of it? It's because I feel so guilty. Other people haven't had that kind of success, and I don't know why I was spared. Only that I was. And I try to give back as much as I can because I was spared. And, so that was that turning point. The room was so dark and so black, and I was letting in all the negative, and that wasn't going to work. So that was it, and then I just I know it's a cliche, but I felt like I rose like the phoenix, from the ashes, beauty from ashes. I was just all about it. I was like, hell, shave my head, let's go. And it was a long recovery back, but I'm still here, like July 12th, I celebrated 37 years sober, I'm still here. I got to go to the beach. Granted, we're stranded now, but that's the beach in the background. That's the picture I took one night. I got to walk on the beach and Ron took a picture. I didn't even know. My feet were in the sand. The ocean was coming up on me, and I just prayed. I just thanked God that I was still here. There's so many things we can get so upset about. And I fall prey to them too. The stupid burnt toast and broken shoelaces, but there's so much more than the burnt toast and broken shoelaces, and just having that moment in the sand to thank God was everything, just everything. So that was the turning point. And it continues. Like when I start to want a bellyache about something, I'm like, no, and not to diminish what's going on in a day-to-day thing, but I try to get a bigger picture and look at like, wow, look at where you were a year ago, look at, you were ringing the bell a year ago, and things were just starting, because I have CT scans every 3 months, and that causes a lot of anxiety, and but they've all been clear, even when they found something and they were convinced that it'd come back. and it had only been 3 months. I said, no, I know what it feels like. It's not this. And it wasn't, it was scar tissue, but it's hard to stay grounded when people that treat pancreatic cancer sometimes only want to tell you the bad news, because there's so much hope out there. There's so much. And I got to tell you, Project Purple sent me a blanket. Like, I was showered. And I purple was never my color, but now it is. Like, I am telling you, my birthstone happens to be purple because I'm a February baby. I used to hate it. Now I'm like, all right, let's bring it on. So, so that was the turning point. And it's a continual turning point to just keep my focus on the gratitude.
That was so powerful. And, thank you for sharing that with us. That was pretty special for me, and hopefully our audience can feel, and for those that have listened to episodes, I've been doing this a long time, 6.5 years of interviewing guests, and there's moments on episodes when that it's like those special moments, and that was one of those special moments, Mary. So thank you for being honest and open and for sharing that with our audience, because I think a lot of people need to hear that. And I'll just leave it at that. Couple questions left for you here, and then we're going to give you a chance to give where our audience can connect with you. You're a pretty accomplished writer, and I know we haven't talked about that. You're on Amazon. You got a whole series of books. You even got you could buy your box set of books.
Yes.
So how has that been, through all this, that I assume that's your day job?
You know what? I wish it was. And from your lips to God's ears, that's what I want. No, I'm in education, and I teach fiction writing, and I also work for the state of Wyoming in education. But the writing came about. My undergrad is in journalism. My master's is in education. The writing came about because my dad was a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer. And it's kind of like being Joe Montana's, son, he's the greatest quarterback of all time, in my perspective. Although my husband would say it's the former Patriot guy. Anyway, but I took classes at a junior college to learn how to write fiction, and started back from the beginning. And my first book never got published, and it shouldn't, but I learned how to do from beginning, middle, end. And one of my books is with Simon and Schuster, and that's A Man for All Seasons. And it's about meeting Ron, because I met him on Christmas, but I make it Thanksgiving, and then it ends on Christmas. But it's a cute little romantic novella, and it was really fun. And I asked him what he wanted his name to be, and he picked the guy's name is Joe. I want to say, I can't remember the name, Rigetti, or some special famous soccer guy with the last name. But anyway, so it just started from there. And I've been with big presses and small presses. And when I went through breast cancer, I wrote 6 books in 18 months on my phone, because with an abdominal hysterectomy, I could not hold a laptop. So those are the box sets. They were all resort romances, because I needed to be in the beach in my mind. And I used to work at the Four Seasons, so I called it the 5 Leaves. I mean, I really didn't get very creative. Romantic comedies, and they're all based in places I love: Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, the Oregon coast, Uinta Head, the lighthouse. So those are my resort romances, and I did them on my phone. So when my student writers are like, "Oh, I don't have the time to write," I'm like, "If you have a phone, you can write." And I did it in the notes section. So during pancreatic cancer, I did a detour, and I was writing a political thriller, and I was still meeting with a writing group, of a very small writing group, every Saturday. No matter how I looked or felt, I would have a chapter, and I did that. And now I just need to finish it, but it's almost like I lost the steam. I don't know. I just haven't finished it, but it's really good. And I don't know. I haven't finished it, but writing gets me through because it puts my mind somewhere else. So it's always my escape. And so I have books under Mary Billiter. I wrote my son, one of my twins, got diagnosed with affective schizophrenic disorder, which is usually what you think is a death sentence. He's so highly functional, got his college degree. He's in the forestry. We wrote a psychological thriller about what happens if a mind is left divided. And so it was told from the mom and the kid's point of view, and we fictionalized it. And it's probably the best work I've ever done. And my publisher said, let's rebrand you and make you M. Billiter because men won't read a female author. Damn men. So, I've taken some of the worst things and turned them into some of the best things. So breast cancer I needed comedy and romance. With my son's diagnosis, I needed to understand. So we wrote it together. And then with pancreatic cancer, I was at the capital city of Wyoming. I could see the Capitol during infusions, and I kept seeing that. And I was like, okay, what would happen if this happened? So it has lobbyists and politicians and all the things that, I knew nothing about, but I learned, and it got my head out of the infusion center. So I would do it on my phone. So that whole book is written on my phone, and I would just email myself chapters.
Fascinating.
Or maddening. I don't know.
No. And this is what's so fascinating. So, we've been talking here almost an hour.
Sorry.
And, I've been taking notes, and you just said something that's very interesting. Escape. The writing was this escape, but the coping, and you mentioned your son and how you deal with things. Have you ever, and hindsight's always 20/20, and I've said this before, sometimes this happens often and sometimes it doesn't. Like, I kind of have this picture here, and I look at like these life events that you talked about, and these experiences. I'm not saying that anything happens for a reason or someone gets cancer for a reason, but the experiences that you experience in your life prepare you. If you're a Catholic, I was born Roman Catholic, so we know the Catholic guilt. I could hear some of that Catholic guilt in there in bits and pieces. I truly believe, faith is very powerful, but I feel that God does give us sometimes what we can handle.
Right.
And things do sometimes happen for a reason. Sometimes we don't have the answer, and sometimes we never will have the answer, right? But sometimes things do happen, and we go down these weird paths or these challenges that we experience that at the time might be monumental. But now look back or fast forward 20, 30 years, we go through similar experiences, and because of what we experienced in the past, we're able to handle or able to manage and do that. So it's fascinating to me, Mary, here to just hear you speak. And I know you mentioned you lost your dad. So you've gone through some trauma, some challenging times, but you've gotten through all this.
Yes, I'm still standing. It's like a Mighty Python movie. I'm not dead yet. I don't know. I've often joked and said I was a swimmer my whole life, and I have broad shoulders, but sometimes I think God thinks they're too broad. But and yet, I can honestly say, even in the worst pain, I would pray and pray and pray and pray and pray and pray and pray. And I would get the relief. And even if it was just for a moment, even if it was blacking out, I don't know, I would get the relief I needed. Maybe I'd cry myself to sleep. I don't know, but the relief would come and it would get me to the next moment. So all of those together, and then looking back and saying, well, you wrote 6 books when you had, breast cancer, you're only doing 1 with this, but romantic comedies are fun and light and easy. And so it was just where I needed to go in my mind. And I'm very goal oriented. I needed to have a goal. I needed to have goals while I was going through this. And it wasn't just getting through the chemo, that is a big part of it, but I needed something outside of that. I couldn't have chemo take away everything. So that's where I set, like, dance with my son at his wedding, write this book, have a chapter each week. Even in the hospital, even with the Whipple, I wrote a chapter, which was nothing short of miraculous. I just was not going to let, my mom was Irish, and I definitely was not, my Irish got up, and I was not going to let it. Don't tell me what I can't do. So I was going to do whatever I had to do to get through it, and then share it, and then give it away, and then help, and then do whatever I can for anybody else suffering. Sometimes it's just a hug. A lot of times it's just a hug and having somebody say, I'm here and I'm so sorry, and it's going to be okay. Even if you don't know it's going to be okay, sometimes you just need to hear that.
So my next question here, and you just teed this up perfectly. Someone listening to this podcast that is where you were back when you originally got that diagnosis, what advice would you give them? And you just gave a great tidbit, but I'm sure there's plenty of other things.
Everybody else, don't get on the internet. Oh God, don't get on the internet. What I love about Project Purple, and I mean this, is that it's always a focus on the positive. It's not like so-and-so, died of this, okay. Yeah, we know that. We know all the famous people that have died of this. It's always like, hey, did you know that early detection saves lives? Or, hey, did you know this? Or, hey, listen to this person's story. It's always a positive. And you can find the negative as much as you can find the positive. And somebody said, oh, get on the Whipple Warrior Facebook group. I had to get off that because I was getting sucked into some negative experiences. And there are those out there. I'm again, not trying to diminish their experience. I needed to go where the light was. Literally, when I opened those shades, I needed to let the light in because the darkness was getting so dark. And that was with everything. And then I just, one thing that really helped me, and it's going to sound weird, but my sister gave me a subscription to one of those meditation apps. And I brought in headphones, not earbuds, headphones into the hospital so I could drown out everything else and just listen. And I listened to a Christian podcast. I listened to, waves. I listened to anything to not focus on the constant beeping. And I think it's a mindset. And I had a priest, because I had last rites every single time. And he'd say, it's all about your attitude. And I was like, you're right. That's the only thing I could control. I could not control how my body was going to react to 5-FU or Gembraxine or any of that good stuff. I could control my attitude. So I dressed up for every single chemo treatment. I know that's stupid, but I was like, I'm going to look good. Even bald, I'm going to look good. So, and for me, that was for me. I needed to look in the mirror and go, oh, there I am. I had no eyebrows, no eyelashes. And let me tell you, when you're trying to tell your kid to empty the trash and your voice isn't doing it and you can't raise your eyebrows, it's a game changer. Like, take out the trash. And he'd laugh at me because I look like, I don't know. But I had to find the humor. I had to go to where the light is, find the humor, and tune out all the negativity, especially my own voice. That was like, this is too much. You can't do it. And I was like, nope. I just had to tune that out. So it's a tall order, and it can't happen overnight. It's literally one moment at a time. It's just one moment at a time.
So powerful. My last question here, and then we're going to share where our audience could connect. And I love your page, by the way. I was looking at it before. There's some really cool content on there. I love some of the things you got, which we'll talk about here in a second. But this is always our last question. There's no right or wrong. It's a loaded question. I always kind of preface it that way. Given your experience, what you've gone through, what's your definition of pancreatic cancer? How do you define it?
Wow. The first thing I thought of is it can't define me. And that's the thing. It's on your chart. I've had Dr. Terabelli retired. I was one of his last patients, and I get a visiting doctor locally, and he'll be always like, oh, you're so lucky. Yes, I am. Pancreatic cancer was that diagnosis, just like my son's, was not going to define me. He didn't let affective schizophrenic define him. I didn't let pancreatic cancer define me. I am a proud supporter of it. I wear the purple. I'm all about it. But it was not going to be Mary Billiter, pancreatic cancer. It wasn't going to be that. That was not going to be my byline. I'm a victor. I'm not a victim. I'm a victor. It's that mindset, right? It's getting in that mindset. So, and again, I know what I'm saying is going to be hard for someone, anybody. And some days you're going to fall to the victim side. I get it. It's not staying in there too long, because then it gets comfortable. And then the cancer wins. No, just no. So, yeah. So I guess I would say that pancreatic cancer, I'm a victor. I'm not a victim. And so
I love it.
It didn't.
I love it. It's so powerful. And you said so many golden things there. I hope our audience is listening. Last piece here. Best place for someone to connect. I mentioned Instagram. I would recommend going to your Instagram page, because I've actually, as I said, I was looking before. And let me say this. I know you've mentioned this many times. You look amazing. I saw your son. You have a link to your son's. You did an article from your son's wedding, and you had really short hair, and you looked amazing. So I know you said, hair. I know we have in this society, I should say, we have this whole thing with vanity, right? Women have to look a certain way. Guys have to look a certain way. But what matters is people, right? And who they are inside. And speaking to you for the hour and 7 minutes as we've been recording here, as I look at the clock, you just have this amazing personality. And if we were in person, I'm a hugger. We would hug. But you're absolutely beautiful without hair, with hair, same person, and so, but you do look amazing on the wedding day. Really, really pretty. So I know you've mentioned a couple times about not having hair and how that probably made you feel. But for someone who's a complete stranger looking at your page, I'm not trying to hit on you, but I'm just telling you that you look amazing. So let me just put that out there. But where's the best place for our audience to connect with you?
I do Instagram, and I think my handle is at Mary Billiter. I'm not sure.
Yes.
This is terrible. In my website, marybilliter.com, just my whole name. There you can read about my son's wedding and see my books. And of course, you can always go on Amazon and Mary Billiter or M Billiter. You can find my books there. And you know what? But you can always, I have had people instant message me on Instagram, and I will respond. I don't check that often. I don't know. And then my son is like, Mom, you have a message, and I will get back. And somebody's sister was going through the Whipple. I will get back to you. It might not be right away, but I will. And then I'll give you my email. It's my whole name, Mary Billiter. And that's B. So Mary, M-A-R-Y, and then Billiter, B as in boy, I-L-L-I-T as in Tom, E-R, at, and it's just the letter Y, mail.com. Yahoo ran out, and so I got a Y.
I love it. I love it.
So, again, I check my spam folder because things go in there, but 100%, please. If I can offer anything, please reach out, and I will give what I can.
Mary, thank you for allowing us to share your journey. It's been an honor for me to talk to you here about your journey, and it's so inspirational. I hope our audience is listening and really taking to heart your journey and all the wonderful things you had to say about how you've beat pancreatic cancer. Thank you for being a guest on the podcast.
Thank you, Dina, so much. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. If you liked today's episode, please share this episode and follow the Project Purple podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. That is a wrap of another episode of the Project Purple podcast. Thanks for listening. Until next time, please be safe.